Do you see my first slide from triads to Enneads?
Oh, good.
And so Ron thought it'd be a good idea to. So this is a different version of what I talked about 6 years ago. The title is the same, but the content is completely different. So the idea is to investigate more about Enneads. I mean, and so I want to just. This is 8 slides here, so we're on 2 out of 8. We want to see how it works and how it relates to psychology and physics. And so I just remind us that this love, wisdom, use is the common pattern of influx, as Swedenborg talks about in many places. There's spiritual triads. You can call them trines or triads, or whatever, but we don't call them trinities for obvious reasons. So we have spirit, mind, and nature as a triad or trine. We have celestial, spiritual, and spiritual natural heavens, 3 heavens. Wherever there are 3s, this seems to be a common factor. Loving, thinking, and acting in the mind. And in physics, we have what I call principles, causes, and events. So principle is some kind of general motivating system which is used. We'll see what some of them are. And so
I'm sorry, Ian, what is natural? Why are you using the word natural in physics?
okay,
What does that mean?
you can remove natural.
Well, I mean,
I
if you're
know,
going to be talking about Swedenborg, you better.
yes. We'll come back to natural in a minute. And so each of these things has a sort of a triad in itself. And we have from divine love and wisdom, the divine is the same in things greatest and least. And so that there's each member of a triad is something that also has a triad inside it. And so we end up with the idea of Enneads. So an Ennead is the Greek word for 9, and a triad is a Greek word for 3. So love, wisdom, and use. So love, something that's concerned with love will have its own triad inside it. For love, you can have love for love, or love for the process of loving, love for wisdom, love of use. And you can have wisdom about love, wisdom about thinking, and wisdom itself, or wisdom about the uses that you make. And so this is the basic idea of going from a triad of 3 to an Ennead of 9. And so I call them degrees and sub-degrees. I realized afterwards that there's some disagreement among Swedenborgians about whether sub-degrees should be called that, or should they be called something else like levels or stages or something like that. But the simplest way, I think, of seeing these 9 things is as they are, as they're a degree of their own kind, which have their own individual components, like sub-degrees, which is, it's an interesting way, I think, and a useful way of thinking about all of these things. I haven't seen much discussion like that in the Swedenborgian literature, but I think it's useful. And so every degree or sub-degree or sub-sub-degree they're all related by influx. And so we have production, which can be downward or to the right. So you can have influx going from the left to right. You can have influx going from top to bottom. And so there's production coming down, or generation, and then lower degrees, later degrees, select according to actions that happen there. So there's a processes. So the general principles that connect all these degrees are generation and selection. And then this produces correspondences between the structures in each of these degrees and the functions of each of these degrees. And so guard. I call this, sometimes I call this blue one the natural mind, and other times I call it the external mind. And so now I'm going to copy some tables to investigate this. These are tables that Ron sends each week as part of his email. So I'm going to talk about them and in a bit more detail. So if you have questions, please feel free to ask. So the heaven, there are 3 heavens, and these are, I now give them numbers to make it unambiguous, which part of the Ennead I'm talking about. So 1, each column is 1, the first number, 1, 2, and 3, and each row is the subdegree of the 1 or 2 or 3. So there are 3 heavens: celestial, spiritual, and natural heaven. Or you could, there's many different terms that Swedenborg uses for the natural heaven. Sometimes call it the celestial, so the spiritual natural heaven, or the heaven of uses, which are the love of doing things, shall we say. And then the middle column is what I call external mind, which has an internal rational and an external rational, and then a sensual mind, or a sensory motor mind, or a corporeal mind, which is the 2.3. And so when we're living on Earth, our external mind is connected to the physical. But after we die, the external mind is disconnected from the physical, but it's connected to heaven. So it depends just on the heaven. So the argument I want to make is that this is the same kind of mind, but it's connected in different ways, before and after we die.
I have a question here for you, Ian.
Yes.
Are we conscious of all 3 levels? Are we conscious of the internal rational?
No, that's these 3. We begin as newborns only in the 2.3.
Yep, I got that.
And then when we get to about 12 or 14, a bit earlier. To get to about 8, we're interested in classifications and causes and stories more, and we're interested in logic and principles, and that's the external rational. And then when we become interested in love and truth and wisdom, then our internal rational opens and begins to receive ideas. So those we grow upwards in this external mind.
Yep, got it.
Could I ask a question or a comment? I've always wanted to put the external mind, the 2 point whatever, I want there to be overlap. There's some overlap between that 2 point whatever and heaven, and overlap with the physical. So the mind is actually immersed in the two.
Yes.
The natural mind is, but that's okay. It looks more like a boundary there with the 3 columns.
Okay, so after death, the heaven and the external mind are closely connected, and the external mind depends entirely on the loves and the wisdom we have in heaven. It's like the outer skin of the heavenly angels. But when we're living on Earth, our external mind is closely connected to the physical. That's why Swedenborg calls it the natural mind. So this picture is a structure. Okay, you haven't yet looked at how the connections work and how close the connections are in different directions. I'm just saying this. Okay, so we come now to the physical one, which is what I want to look at in this talk. Because Swedenborg, if you look at the bottom here, Last Judgment, Posthumous 320, he talks about 3 natural atmospheres arising from the sun of the world: the pure ether from which springs gravity. Yeah, so we should really put pure ether here. And then there's an intermediate ether, Swedenborg says, from which springs magnetism, and I say electricity and magnetism. And then the lowest ether, which is air or material, something material. And so these things are like some sub-degrees of the physical degree. And then underneath here, I write this in terms of what things that current physics would recommend or recognize, such as gravity, is which is the space-time that organizes the possibilities for interactions, how far apart things are. So scientists don't really know how gravity is connected to the other ones. And then there's the middle field, which is Lagrangians, are virtual fields which are described most easily by Lagrangians, which are the processes which give rise to mass and give rise to the forces between objects. And once you have the masses and the forces between objects, you can then they go into what's called the Hamiltonian, which is a mathematical way of describing the 3.3 degree. So we have the 3.3 has what's called ordinary quantum mechanics, which has the Hamiltonian with energy, which was mass and kinetic energy and potential energy. It has propagating wave functions, and it has measurements and then actualizations.
Ian, can I ask a little question about the mathematics involved with all of this? And I'm acutely aware that there's I think I understand physics because I do math. Okay.
Yes.
Do you get into that a little bit later? Or
No.
not, or drop it for now?
I could expand what the mathematics is and how it's connected to reality, because physics is not just mathematics. It's got to have substance, so it's a physical thing. It's got to have a form, so you can describe, which is the part that's described by the mathematics, and it's got to have events or changes, which is substance and changes. Not quite so easy to describe in mathematics. So you have to work hard to make sure you're doing physics rather than mathematics. Mathematics is the possibilities of everything that happens in physics, but you've got to describe what actually is there, not just physics. So in practice, there's a difference between physics and math. Every paper I read, I think about, are they doing physics by describing substance, form, and change, or are they just doing mathematics?
Will I be able to make that same creative jump from the external mind into heaven? Is that the same mind, that mathematics?
Well, I want to argue that each of these 9 things has a substance of its own, a form of its own, and events of its own.
Got it. Okay, keep going. I got it.
But it's easiest to see that need of substance, form, and event by looking at the 3.3, at the Schrodinger equation and what it does. So, but you can, everyone...
Before you get there, can you, on the Lagrangian again, when we talk about the virtual fields, when do they become real fields? Is that the Higgs boson?
They become real when they get to 3.3, when they have influx into the 3.3. They're still real, but they're real in their own way. Each of these 9 sub-degrees has its own kind of substance, its own kind of form, its own kind of behavior. And you could spend, if you're a professional scientist, you could spend your entire life looking at any one of these 9 sub-degrees. People do. I mean, Fernando spent a lot of his early life looking at the 3.2 degree, with virtual fields and virtual processes, quantum field theory. I spent my professional life looking at the 3.3. I assume that the Lagrangian and the virtual fields have done their thing, and now I'm looking at just the behavior with the Hamiltonian. My entire professional life starts off with a Hamiltonian. So each of these, you can spend a lot of your investigation looking at one of these sub-degrees without thinking about how it connects with the other ones. Okay? But now I want to look at a bit more of, okay, so these 9 subdegrees, which we have from Swedenborg, I want to think about how they relate to each other, their thinking, what the functions of these 9 subdegrees. So heaven, so this is a sort of a slightly abstract way of reformulating what Swedenborg says in a systematic way, a philosophical way. Heaven is concerned with, the first column is concerned with intending. The middle column, the external natural mind, is concerned with considering alternatives. And the physical column is concerned with implementing changes or doing something. And so, so this is just an abstract way of thinking about how the heaven, the internal mind and the external mind and the physical are related to each other. There's intending, considering alternatives, and doing something. I mean, this is the basic pattern we hope to recognize from everyday life. This is whenever we think of, we intend or want to do something, we consider the alternatives, and then we do it. And this is a systematic way, I think, of looking at even the subdegrees. Because in heaven, the celestial heaven is about intending to love. The spiritual heaven is alternative ways of loving, thinking about things. And then the natural heaven, or the spiritual natural heaven, is implementing or doing what is loved. And similarly, the external mind, the first one, internal rational, is about how to intend to think properly. That's what religion tells us, how we should intend to think. But scientists, is the middle 2.2 is where most of science occurs. This is alternative ways of thinking. We have models, we have theories. Each of them is an alternative way of thinking. And then 2.3 is where the experimentalist of the science is concerned. He wants to use the alternative ways of thinking to implement what is thought, to make a plan to do something, or to test the plan. And now we come to the physical. So the point of this exercise is that we see something different about 3.1. We begin to see how we think of 3.1, because that's a bit of a mystery for science. I gave this talk to the Swedenborg Society, or a similar talk to the Swedenborg Society 22 years ago, and 3.1, I said, was a mystery. Scientists know that there's something there, but they don't know what it is. And so we're trying to get a clue of what that is. And 3.2 is alternative ways of changing. So this is how forces are set up, how you make electric forces, nuclear forces, etc. The alternative ways of changing. And then 3.3 is implementing what has changed. And then actually, at the very end, 3.3.3 is doing what has changed. So now I want to look at this 3.1, because
Ian, can I interrupt just for a second?
Yes, please.
Let's go to the middle column again. Where would
Yeah.
you say the activity of philosophers resides?
Okay. So to do that, we have to look at the 3 subdegrees within 2.2.
Oh,
Okay. So we need to look at the principles of how to make alternative ways of thinking, which is 2.2.1. That's where philosophy is.
okay.
Then we have to have how to work out the details of alternative ways of thinking. That's 2.2.2, and then we have to have etc. So within
Okay.
that, you can see how philosophy and sort of practical deductions fit together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So 2.2.1, which is, I haven't spelled out here, this is where people invent worldviews, ideologies, cosmologies, and scientists are stuck they get to there and they think they're considering all the possibilities.
Okay,
But
I'm gonna have to be interrupted just for, thank you, Ian, I appreciate that. I have a workman here I have to deal with for a minute. Okay.
Well, Ron's recording this, aren't you, Ron?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So
I'm recording.
now we want to use
Made the schedule to deliver this, it's just me.
okay.
But here's.
Somebody mute. Somebody
Ron,
have
can
a-
you mute Steve, please?
And then when I get home, I do the roof. Yeah. And we'll do it that way.
Yeah,
I
okay.
muted him.
Okay, now we want to do something new that uses this insight. We want to know what 3.1 is, okay? Which is we go back, it's intending changing, how to intend to change. We have to work out what that could be. And this is an example of the method. I use the principles of Swedenborg and apply them to each sub-degree. So now the physical degree, which is at the top here, the physical sub-degree is 3.1.2.3. Now we go into the sub-degrees of the physical, and we have to, what we have to use these principles of intending changes, we have to now recognize what in nature we know could we be talking about. We have to apply these principles. So up to now, we've just been talking about general principles, but now we're going to find something in science that these principles apply to. And so I'm going to apply them to something which I think is missing in science, which are ends in nature, or final causes, or targets, or it's a kind of physical purpose that the people used to think was in nature, but in the 1600s and afterwards, these are all removed from nature. So from physical nature. And so I'm trying to put targets back. So the targets, which is the first row, which is all the 3.1, is trying to put a little bit of final cause or ends back into physical world in a way that it's related to gravity, because gravity sets up the distances between things. So this is, but it's a bit more general. And so this is where we can apply what we can apply to the questions of protein folding and also to mind-body interactions. I gave a talk, previous talks about protein folding, and then at Brenathan recently I talked about mind-body interactions. So these are all ways of seeing how targets could be useful in the world. So these
Ian, you're avoiding using words like belief and creativity and things like that, and I'm probably on purpose. It makes me feel a little uncomfortable, but in a good way. Okay, so I just want to report that.
Okay, beliefs. Okay, when we talk about beliefs, we can talk about our own beliefs because we believe them. So this is what I believe is the way we should look at these sub-degrees. But then you can talk about beliefs in other people, what they believe, which influences what they love and what they think. So this beliefs, and so creativity is then the influx from higher degrees into the way you think. So these are all, creativity involves the transition from one discrete degree to another.
Oh, that's a good answer. Thank you.
I have one comment on that, on this question here.
Yes.
So, well, first of all, you've made a nice distinction with Max's question about belief. So you can say I, Ian, believe that, and then you can make a either a philosophical or a scientific statement with no contradiction. That's how we use the word.
Yes.
Now then, however, we go into a little more technical area where science is actually doing science. and we would know they don't use the word belief. But that is what, and I'm saying this as a comment, and you could correct me. However, that is what a hypothesis is. It's a form of belief.
Yes,
A hypothesis. It's a statement of, I think this is true. I'm going to
yes,
find out.
yes. I want to consider the world in which this is true. That's what a hypothesis is.
Okay, so I'm just linking the word belief with hypothesis.
Yeah,
They're
so
rather
so
similar.
so this green row is what I now believe is happening in nature all the time. This is my hypothesis, and I'm trying to find out the consequences of what it would apply so that scientists could check it. So I'm actually, in my own mind, I'm using 2.2 logic to work out what it means. And so say this first row, the green row of targets, is setting up targets. The second row, which is quantum field theory, it's going to be used in order for targets to be optimized and implemented. And then once the targets are implemented, then you generate the actual results. So the last couple of slides, well, the next slide is what happens in the 3.21, this targeting process. So let's look at so these are texts which Ron has copied diligently into each email he sends each week. So I want to say how targets work in 3.1. So I'm going to use ideas from Swedenborg to look at the stages of 3.1, the three stages, 3.1.1, 3.1.2, and 3.1.3. So I'm going to use the same principles when I want to know what any degree is doing. I say in it, there's something like love, wisdom, and use, or end, cause, and effect, or something like this. And so I say the first 3.1.1, I want to say this is where targets are received from the spiritual world. This is the first influx of a target. So a target is something that comes from a mental decision to behave in a certain way. And now the physical world is you're setting up, you're building a computer in the physical world to actually organize these targets. But it's not a computer, but it's actually something that works automatically with a feedback loop to achieve a target. So the target is received, and then 3.1.2, you work out a specific target. You work out, so the options for a particular, you have to work out what time to set the target for, and then the influx say what you have to do at that time. And then 3.1.3, you set a specific target for some future in the near future, and you work out it's like setting a thermostat to achieve a particular temperature, but now you're setting a shape for what the molecules in the world, the protein molecules or the electrons, should be doing at some future time. And then once you've worked out what the protein what its shape should be, it's in the future, then you have to organize the forces in nature to change the protein shape from what it is now, which might be an unfolded arrangement, into the folded arrangement in the future. So you have to organize the electric forces to move the molecule or the electrons into the right configuration. So you start off with the current parameters, the current arrangement of the amino acids in the molecule, and then their electric charges, and then you organize the electric permittivities to produce this particular shape in the future. So, and then you have to investigate whether the the electric permittivities that you're going to organize in the near future, those which change the molecule from what it is now to what it is in the future. So you have to do a little trial propagation. You have to think ahead. And so this is a two-step. You have to propagate, you have to calculate what the future is going to be, starting from its present position and with your proposed electric forces, and see whether it comes to the right result. And if it doesn't come to the right result, you have to adjust the electric forces to give the right result. And so you have to feed the discrepancy back to where all the forces should be adjusted. And then there's a system, there's a mathematical system called self-adjoint waves, which propagates the errors back. And so I'm saying that the targeting system is using the quantum field theory to work out what the electric charges how they should be adjusted to achieve a right result. And because it's a 2 degree is whenever you have a 2 degree or subdegree, you can think forward and backwards. You could in your mind, when you want to think of the future, you can either work out from going forward to the future, or you can think backwards from the future back to now. So whenever there's a 2 degree, whether it's in the mind or in nature, you can have forward and backward propagations. It's a reversible process.
You use the word adjoint. Is that, I've seen that word in optimization world. Is that the mathematical?
Yes,
same
I'm
thing.
using
Okay,
the
thank
same
you.
principle.
So we're really getting pretty close to the scary mathematical explanation here.
To actually do this, there's a lot of mathematics.
Okay.
And if you wanted to know the mathematics, I could describe it for you.
Not today, thank you.
But an adjoint, the forward way, when you're doing adjoint optimization, you do a forward propagation from the present to the future, then you work out the discrepancy, and then you propagate the error as an adjoint wave coming back using the same Hamiltonian, the same wave, the same differential operator. It can be used to propagate the errors back to the present. And as you propagate back, you can work out how to change each of the permittivities in the intervening change to get the right result. So this is well known in optimization theory. So this part is easy to simulate on a computer, but I'm saying that nature does it itself. So at the bottom, so nature produces, you can produce the sensitivities at the target time to start the back propagation. Okay, so if we carry on, so that was 3.1. Now the last slide here is to see how 3.2 and 3.3 work. So now I'm looking at sub-degrees in physics. I could have described sub-degrees in the mind, and Steve asked me a question which I needed to look at sub-degrees, but now we're looking at physics. So this is things that Fernando should recognize. You have a Lagrange, so 3.2 has sub-degrees, 3.2.1, 0.2.3. These behave as end, cause, and effect, okay? So the physical end for virtual events is described by the minimization of a Lagrangian function, minimization of the integral of a Lagrangian density. And this describes all possible fields, and so you minimize it. And then 3.2.2 is propagating this into the future once you've got a minimized form. And as you propagate, you have virtual events, which are all the possible interruptions, 3.2.3. So when you're doing with quantum physics, you have a governing principle, you have a waveform which is being propagated into the future, and then you have the effects at each point. You have events, you have virtual events. And so 3.2.3, you can use it to find out what all the masses and the interaction potentials are going to be in the future. And so once you've got them, then you can use the Hamiltonian operator in the 3.3, which is what I do in my day job. You have a kinetic energy operator, which has the mass. You have the potential energy operator, which has the electric and nuclear forces. And then that's the principle at 3.3.1. 3.3.2 is this, you solve this operator, you find the wave function into the future as a wave packet for each particle, and they can be correlated. You have a configuration space. And then 3.3.3, you have what I call actual selections, which is a generalization of what quantum physics called measurements. Measurements are the selection of a particular result, but I think it happens all the time, because Swedenborg says that in the physical world, you produce definite actual things. History is composed of actual things that actually happen. So physics, quantum physics has got to produce them. So actual particles are localized into small spatial regions and without quantum entanglements. So this is the end of this discussion for me here. So I'm trying to start off with the basic triad of Swedenborg of love, wisdom, and use, or end, cause, and effect. I want to apply them to the heavens. I want to apply them to the thinking. I want to apply them to physics. And each time I apply them, I want to look at the sub-degrees, because that we have to see the details. So each physicist or mathematician can spend their entire life looking at 3.2. That's what Fernando did for a large part of his life. I use 3.3 to describe nuclear reactions for my professional life. You can do these things. Okay, so that's the end of my little presentation.